This conference will now be recorded.
Is just another risk, because we need to ensure in the balance of risk controls that COVID didn't take priority over any other the risk or the engineering controls we had in place within the infrastructure, because there's a lot more risks out there which can kill and harm people. So our first step was to ensure that whatever strategy we put in place was seen as just another risk. Our approach also is within the unified leadership approach, because the alliances are slightly different from the old client-contractor relationships. The SRSA, South Rail Systems Alliance, is formed of Coalesce, AECOM and Network Rail. So the client is actually part of the alliance infrastructure itself with regard to leadership and management. So we had that greater depth of experience and understanding whilst we were putting the approach and strategies together. And because of the Network Rail involvement, we automatically had stakeholder involvement. So we gained insight in our daily conferences on strategy with regards to the routes and the region's viewpoint and what the perspective is of risk control. We actively shared strategy and best practice and discussions with the other alliances as well, the other two alliances, so that together we could actually see what each of us were actually trying to put forward is new engineering or behavioural strategies, and share what worked and what didn't work, for the greater good of trying to get COVID-19 strategies in place to actually maintain the infrastructure. We engaged initially with the trade unions and with supply chain as well. We did this so we could get the buy-in and engagement of the workforce on the ground. And the trade unions were very much involved with regards to the COVID champions, and I'll go on to the COVID champions later. And last but not least is we put in a continuous improvement program as well, to continually review what strategies we had in place were working and what were not working, and what the perception of risk was out there and how the behaviours of personnel were, because we need to ensure that our strategies were simple enough to understand and easy enough to implement. Now going on to the actual controls itself. In very early stages, within the first week and a half, we actually had good process control documents in place. So we had control documents in place to actually manage the additional requirements on PPE and the additional requirements on COVID-19 itself, which is, you can see the two front covers there on the right-hand side. And the documents themselves were very much a process control approach. So you can see one of the flow charts, and this one in question is the decision-making process for PPE. So we try to keep it really simple. So as I've mentioned earlier, we recognized the balance of risk control. So throughout the process, we're actually balancing against the original controls that are out there. And within the controls, we needed to ensure that the 2 meters key control was established throughout. And this kept it really simple, so that we ensured that when we're briefing the personnel and managing the risks out on site, everyone understood your main risk control is 2 meters. Only when you get inside 2 meters, on a rare approved occasions, do we have additional controls in place. Outside 2 meters, the normal controls apply. For those identified inside the 2 meters, as mentioned, we actually then kicked off our transformational work stream, which Nick's going to go into in detail in a couple of slides. We had easy to understand PPE requirements, as the flowchart states there, in simple table and flowchart formats for all of our controls. And we had early identification of additional resources required, so we could actually gain access and ensure we had these resources in place, whether it be PPE, additional cleaning contracts, etc. We had early recognition to ensure the robust process was in place. We appointed COVID champions, and we appointed these champions in about the first week and a half. And the role of the COVID champion was not a leadership or supervisory role, it was an assurance role. The leadership and supervisory role are actually well laid out within rail infrastructure through COSs and safe work leaders. So the COVID champions were specifically tasked with assurance and an aid memoir on site. So we have one COVID champion out on the site itself amongst the rail infrastructure while the workforce are working, to try and help them and guide them and instill that behaviour of 2 meters separation, because it's not a natural behaviour to actually stay 2 meters away from somebody. So they were there to help and guide the personnel to do that. And in the access and egress was the same. It's to remind personnel and instill the controls in place so we can actually build that change in behaviour. Easy to use diagrams and posters to allow the COVID champions, while guiding the behaviours of the person on site, to actually point to the posters and the actual diagrams out on site to make the briefings and the reminders easy. And as mentioned, as I'm saying, engagement and communication was key. So the COVID champions were leading all these briefings and the personnel and the controls after being fully briefed themselves. And they were a conduit, these champions, to being a continuous improvement, feeding back to ourselves what was working, what wasn't working, and any actions raised by the personnel who are really starting to get involved on the site level to actually tell us what we could do better. And over to Nick.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so thanks, Steve. So what did we do as a Southern Alliance to try and see what was going on and how we could perform differently in site? So we set out on the alliance of trying to understand all the tasks we did daily, where we regularly come within 2 meters of each other. And you see a video playing on the right-hand side of the screen. This is a pretty a task we carry out pretty much every weekend, every night on the track renewals, and that's making a temporary joint, which traditionally would take a couple of people, a couple of PTS workers, and we'll make a temporary joint. So we decided to have a look at everything we did and see if we could do it with just a single person. So we used a model tool called the TGROW model just to help us understand what we was doing. So if you have a look, we got the task, and that's clearly building a temporary rail joint. And the goal was to build a temporary rail joint while maintaining 2 meters of social distancing. Before we go any further, it's very important we understand what the reality was and what we did every day. And we basically, one track worker held the fish plates and clamps while the other one tightened the clamps. Clearly, that would require people to work within 2 meters of each other. So then, as a group, we discussed what opportunities there were to do something differently. And we decided that actually, the person holding the clamp could actually be replaced with some form of mechanical means. So we had a look at what was out there, and simply we came across getting a G clamp, which we could secure the clamps to the rail, and then the same person could then tighten up for the clamps. And that worked absolutely successfully. So we used a similar model. We went right across all the tasks we did, the P-Way, OLE, EMP, S&T, the list goes on, to see whatever we could do. Could we actually stop people working within 2 meters of each other? And we had quite a good success of doing this. There were a few tasks which we can't ever achieve that, especially some of the S&T guys, where they're working in very close proximity. But there we could put air-fed masks and other mitigations in place to keep the workforce safe. So we move on to the next slide. We then decided actually we need to sort of understand what we do with COVID, because we're spending an awful lot of money mitigating the risk. What can we actually take forward? What's useful to take forward into the future? So some of the things that have been particularly successful is video conferencing for a definite win. And just the sheer fact that I'm speaking to you all today proves that. So MS Teams has allowed the Alliance to keep working, keep delivering without the need for travelling or meeting. And yes, it took a bit of time for us to pick up on it and get a bit slick on it, but it's now the standard form of communications right across the Alliance. And what's unique is we have COLAS, we have AECOM, we have Network Rail, we all have different IT platforms. But with the commonality of MS Teams, there is no difficulty about us sharing information, communicating whatsoever. So we really want to intend to take this going forward. But also, we sort of do acknowledge that sometimes it's good to have people in the same room, or it will be after social distancing ends. So we've also looked at things like meetup cameras, where we can put a single camera in a meeting room, which are then connected instantly to any of our laptop devices, regardless of whatever the company is. So, for example, we have our construction team in Bristol and our design team in Swindon. They can both meet in their separate meeting rooms, put the screen up in each room, and we can literally join 2 meeting rooms together. So we, during lockdown, a few of us have ordered these devices. We've been testing them, and as soon as we're safe to go back to the offices, we'll get these deployed, and we can really start cutting down on reduction in travel. In November, one of our teams spent over £50,000 just in rail tickets alone. In April, during lockdown, that went down to £800. So you can see there's some significant savings to be made in travel reduction if we just get it right going forward. Another thing that we did early days was we made a load of COVID-19 signage, and there was all very specific to COVID-19. But it didn't take long to realise that actually social distancing is going to be around for quite some time going forward. But also some of the messages around COVID-19, like washing your hands, keeping things clean, actually is relevant regardless of the pandemic. So after initially producing a lot of signage which COVID-19 specifically, we then actually thought, no, actually, we're spending money on this signage. How can we make it usable going forward? So as you can see from the top right-hand picture, is actually a lot of our signage, we removed any reference to COVID-19, but just kept the safety messages such as welcome, please wash your hands, and the life-saving rules. So actually, even post-pandemic, all this equipment we've brought is still relevant and usable. We also looked at health surveillance, IR cameras at sites and offices for when people come in, so we could do some mass surveillance. But equally, it's the same technology. Could we actually deploy this technology for facial recognition, for efficient signing in and out? So rather than having a person signing individuals in and out, actually a quick scan, we can work out exactly who the person is and register them automatically. So we're going to be taking some of this technology forward and trying to develop it to help us make more things efficient on site. And finally, we've been looking at more innovation and more efficient use of the existing plant to maintain the social distancing. A lot of the time, it's very easy for us to simply just do things in pairs or teams, but actually we've got an awful lot of plant equipment which we can use to make things easier. So we're looking very much at using what plant equipment we have on site and actually really utilising it to reduce the risk of manual handling and other things. So over to you again, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. So carrying this forward, let's start looking at some of the key areas through pictures that will actually show this all being implemented on site. I'll start off with our COVID-19 champion. So I've mentioned quite a bit during the presentation. Now, the image on the left-hand side is thanks to LinkedIn, and it's something someone posted on LinkedIn from Network Rail Western with regards to Charlotte. Meet Charlotte. She's acting as a COVID-19 champion, engaging staff to ensure that everyone follows the government guidelines. And there's a picture of Charlotte standing in front of one of our arches, which gives all the guidance as people enter the site. And on the right-hand side, it shows one of our sign-in windows with their little posters around the outside saying your COVID champion for this shift is. So the COVID champions, as mentioned earlier, we're out on site and out of the access areas, meeting and greeting people, reminding them of the rules and the regulations and all the codes of practice so that we get the right attitude and behaviours from the second someone turns up the site. Next one is all about engagement. I've mentioned engagement to the supply chain was key. And this is some of the reasons why we engaged the trade union representatives and asked them if they wanted to be COVID champions to help drive their behaviours themselves of wanting to represent the workforce and try to feed back to us and utilise that knowledge and that infrastructure. And on here you can see on the top right hand side is an email back from one of these COVID champions telling us how it all went, good, bad and indifferent. And on the top left hand side an example of a text message from one of our supply chain which they send out to all of their personnel, giving them guidance or pieces of information or please remember the COVID-19 items. If you've got any questions, ring this number, or if there's any been updates to the COVID regulations or the rules we put out, it's also used for that. So they get a text message saying, when you get to site, be aware that this has changed. And then the COVID champions remind that, reinforce that, and give them a formal briefing as well. So engagement was the key to this whole process. And some pictures to finish off, some pictures are all in place. This is site access, people turning up to the site access with social distancing in place. Turning up to the gates after being dropped off from their vans and vehicles. Everyone standing 2 meters apart until they actually get to the site access area to sign in and prove who they are and show their various cards. Then we move on to the actual safety briefings themselves and the safety conversations. So there's a number of pictures of 3 or 4 personnel standing around getting a briefing from the COS or the safe work leader, all 2 meters apart. One of the first things we do before any of the briefings is the person undertaking the briefing ensures everybody in a circle can clearly understand them, but also the safety conversations, which are usually held face to face and naturally only a few feet apart. So the bottom right hand one and the small middle one is where we have a a leader or a supervisor actually having a verification conversation with somebody, just checking their understanding of a task. But again, this has been achieved 2 meters apart. Then on site signage, as Nick's mentioned, we had a number of site signage made up, some coronavirus specific to begin with, but then we started integrating with the site signage so we can use it going forward. This is the separation, and this is where the main key came in with regards to transition and looking at engineering controls. Most of the work we can do, as shown on the left-hand side, can actually be achieved outside 2 meters. And once you're outside that 2 meters, the COVID controls don't actually apply. We use the normal controls of the rail industry. It's only when we've got the odd occasion where we've got no option, especially in signaling and telecommunications work, S&T, where on the right-hand side, you have personnel have to come within 2 meters of one another, where we have the additional controls in place, and those tasks are specifically approved by the senior leadership before they go ahead. Additional cleaning, we actually brought a couple of more cleaning companies on board very early on. As I said, we looked at the resource requirements early on, and this is one of the areas we identified. So we brought on a couple of additional cleaning companies to ensure we could actually meet the additional controls we put into our procedures. And last but not least, we ensured feedback. Now, the right-hand side, again, is thanks to LinkedIn. And this is one of our key stakeholders from Network Rail, Stuart Calvert, who's a Capital Delivery Director, telling us how it went with regards to a visit to site, the COVID controls. And on the left-hand side, it's a couple of snippets. We've got loads of these coming from the personnel actually out on site, the operatives, telling us how they thought our COVID controls were working. So another good shift at Swansea on Saturday night. The longer the situation is going on, the more good the behaviour is becoming normal practice. And that was a really good one. That's key, because in the initial stages, changing human behaviour to have people stand 2 meters apart at all times is not as easy as it sounds. And the last two, the process for people signing in was very good, with very strict, only one person in the SAC cabinet at any one time, and people waiting to sign in were over 2 meters apart. And another individual sending us an email, everyone on site had a good awareness of COVID-19 rules and respected them. Thank you very much. This is the end of our presentation.
Right, thank you very much, Steve and Nick. That was fascinating. I hope out there you're all thinking up your questions. There's a lot of thought-provoking stuff in that presentation. I hope it's got the grey cells moving. Moving on now, we're going to look at bridges and structures, and the world, how COVID has affected that world. Greg Rutherford of AECOM is going to give us some insights on that. Greg is District Sector Lead for AECOM's Bridges and Structures team in the north of England, where he oversees a variety of rail and highway bridge schemes. Greg's a chartered civil engineer with over 20 years experience in the inspection, assessment and design of bridge structures and temporary works. Greg actually joined AECOM in 1999. Greg's key roles have included structures lead on the A1 Dishforth Department upgrade to motorway standard, and more recently leading a team of design engineers designing rail bridge refurbishment schemes on London North Eastern region. So Greg, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Just checking, can you hear me and see my screen okay?
Yes, I can hear and see perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to talk today about the Civils Assessments Framework Agreement and the impact of COVID-19. It's quite an interesting counterpoint to the SRSA work. The SRSA works, some big, large-scale renewal scheme, whereas the CAFA framework is, where we're doing bridge inspections, smaller scale works, but a lot more in terms of sites of them around the country, which we'll see. So what I want to do in the presentation is just give an introduction to the Civils Assessments Framework Agreement. So apologies for those who know what it is, but I think it's it's useful just to give some context about the project, and it gives more understanding really about the challenges we've faced in the mitigation. So I'll give an introduction to the project, talk about the challenges from COVID-19, some mitigation measures which we've introduced, and some key points that we're taking away in summary. So the Civils Assessments Framework Agreement, this is Network Rail's bridge assessment framework. The Network Rail own 32,000 bridges over the 8 routes, and typically structure assessments are mandated every 18 years. This varies slightly depending on particular structure type, but as an average 18 years. So you can see that's a lot of inspections and assessments that need to be completed every year, and this is complementary to the bridge examination contracts that run in parallel. So the visual examinations are done every 2 years, detailed examinations, which are hands-on inspections of a structure, every six years, and the inspections that support the assessment work are like a more enhanced version of the detailed examination, where we have to get hands-on with the structure, but equally we have to do a lot more measurement in terms of the geometry of the structure, and measuring any defects and corrosion loss and the like. In terms of AECOM, we've been involved with assessment frameworks in various forms for over 20 years, carrying out up to 500 inspections and assessments a year. So we've got a lot of experience in this form of work. We're delivering CAFA nationwide. We deliver from multiple offices. I'm based in the Newcastle office of AECOM. We've got a team of 80 bridge engineers there, and the inspections can range from Kent all the way up to Wick in northern Scotland. So it's a large area to cover. And just some example structures there is Royal Border Bridge, as a large concrete truss at Finsbury Park, historic structure, and Riverine Viaduct near Peterborough. And the typical structures we look at, masonry structures form the bulk of the structures on the network, closely followed by metallic structures, metallic girders, and truss structures, with a smaller percentage of in situ and pre-stressed concrete, and a very small percentage of timber structures. They can be single span, small 2-3 metre span structures, up to multi-span viaducts. And again, you can see there's King Edward Bridge in Newcastle. It's very close to our office. There can be span over road, rail, water, and the structures can include rail bridges, road bridges, and footbridges as well. So all manners of structures. In terms of the access techniques we need to get hands-on. We need to be within touching distance for the structures when we do an inspection for assessment. So typically we'll be using ladders, mutes, both road and RRVs, underbridge units. You can see an underbridge unit on a bridge in Gateshead here. Roped access, just to photograph some roped access inspection we did in Clyde Viaduct in Glasgow. Also pontoons, scaffolds, confined space access techniques, and also ever increasing use of drones as well. I'm just going to touch on the typical CAFA work cycle. Really, we start off with planning the inspection so that we can do them safely, both in terms of track access and just physical access to the bridge. Then we do the inspection, prepare a report on condition, and where we also describe how we're going to do the assessment report, which goes to Network Rail for review. And then we do the assessment report as well, where we can do you can see some output there from some of the analysis that we do in a structure, where we take into account the current condition of the bridge, so we can predict a capacity of the structure and check it's adequate for the loading that we're running across it at the moment, or if we need to do any refurbishment works, or if we need to replace the structure. So April, May, the start of CP6 year 2, April, May are always key months for us, really, in terms of making a start on in inspection work, because you can see from the floor there that doing the inspections earlier in the year releases work for the team downstream, and the project team, it varies, it could be 100, 130 people working on the CAFA project, and it's a large team to feed in terms of workload. So in terms of the challenges we faced, I just thought it was worth reminding ourselves of the key dates, really. 16th of March, the first daily briefing where the UK government advised everyone to work from home where possible. The formal lockdown on the 23rd of March with a stay at home message, and a clarification on the 23rd of March from Robert Jenrick, the UK Housing Minister, on confirming that work on site will continue. Obviously with slightly different guidance in Scotland in terms of construction work. So at the time, which is a critical period for us on the CAFA project, really, as with everyone, we're heading into the unknown. There's a lot of initial questions and challenges. Are we allowed to continue with inspections? Can we carry out the inspections safely if we do carry them out? Can we travel safely? If we do, how are vehicles going to be cleaned? Do we have enough PPE, hand sanitizer, wipes? How are we going to establish communications? Also, just interpretation of the government advice. The government advice was pretty fluid at the time. Certainly, there's a lot of change between January, February into March and April that we had to try and follow. How to maintain social distancing while travelling and on site, and how to maintain hygiene on site. And really, in the background, we're always aware of the fact that we needed to complete these inspections to provide downstream work for the team. So in terms of developing a response, the confirmation from the UK government that construction works can continue was really useful, but essential to us really was the letters we received from Network Rail and Highways England, actually, confirming that maintenance work and inspections were essential works to support the running of infrastructure, nationally important infrastructure, and they could continue. And interestingly, Network Rail Scotland also confirmed that inspection work was essential infrastructure work, which again gave us good support to continue working in Scotland. In parallel with this, the AECOM were developing sort of company-wide project guidance for coronavirus. But one key lesson from this is that generic guidance doesn't really work. It's got to be project-specific or task-specific guidance, and we developed a CAFA-specific risk assessment for working with coronavirus mitigation. And this was done in parallel to Network Rail's COVID-19 work instruction CP009. And we felt reassured really when CP009 was published. It mirrored a lot of what we'd already put in place on the CAFA risk assessment as well. We managed to source sanitizer, wipes, and masks to keep the team supplied. And we also established a program of daily remote coordination meetings via Teams, so we could coordinate the works on site in conjunction with fortnightly update meetings with Network Rail as well. And we also provided all the teams, because the teams are going out far and wide across the country, with letters that they could carry with them, just confirming that the work they were doing is essential work. So letters both from AECOM and Network Rail as well. I've grouped the key challenges that we faced into three areas really: planning, travelling, and inspections. When we're planning inspections, you normally would be using the major hotel change, but most of those hotels were closed with lockdown restrictions. Some were open in city centre locations for key workers, but a lot of the sites we're working on are extremely remote, and we needed to look elsewhere. Similarly for welfare facilities as well, where we'd been able to use 24-hour cafe facilities like McDonald's and others. Those were then closed. In terms of complying with social distancing for travel, we had to come up with some methodology about how we're going to do that, especially for some of the longer distances that we needed to travel. And the inspection techniques, because we need to get hands-on within touching distance of structures, we needed to think about how we could maintain social distancing on site and still use the equipment, or whether it was safe to use equipment on site: ladders, scaffolds, mutes, roped access techniques. How we're going to maintain hygiene on site, and how we're going to continue to work with subcontractors. So in terms of mitigation, we've formed really looking at a hierarchy of risk when we developed our risk assessment for travel, where possible, using single occupancy vehicles where possible. Where not possible, where we're travelling in northern Scotland, it's not practical, both in we're looking at balance of risks, and it's not practical to have, if we've got an inspection with 10 people on it, to have 10 vehicles travelling up to northern Scotland, because then we're just introducing more risks in terms of driver fatigue. So so we look at using people carriers with an internal barrier, with a maximum of 2 per vehicle, someone sat in the front, someone sat in the back with a barrier, approved barrier fitted to maintain social distancing. In terms of accommodation, move to self-catering accommodation. Certainly that's been successful for us in Scotland, where we've been doing that. And all accommodation had to have separate bedrooms and bathrooms, so staff could be effectively isolated from each other when they're in the accommodation. And welfare facilities, where we couldn't find 24-hour service stations, having to look at provision of welfare vans. In terms of the vans, that's just one of the vans that we used with an internal sheeting barrier that we established, and just showing really that we can maintain that 2 metre separation distance between the driver and the passenger. In terms of inspection techniques, there's just a video running in the background there that you can see about how we tried to adopt the use of ladders for single person use. The ladders that we use have got stabilizer bars at the bottom, so using sandbags, ballast bags at the bottom of the ladder. So we can use a single person to operate the ladder. This doesn't work in every situation, but there are certain situations where this was an option. For larger structural access, larger heights, we do have to go still use 2 people for setting up ladders. When we do this, it's about providing appropriate PPE. Surgical masks will be provided for engineers when we're doing that, and the time limited for contact will be a maximum of 15 minutes in accordance with the restrictions in CP 009. For mutes, we often use road mutes. Normally we'd have 2 people in a basket. One of them might be operator, or might have 2 engineers in a basket, but we just moved to having the operator down below and 1 person in the basket, and we'll only have the same person in the mute throughout the shift. Briefings, which we've touched on in the SRSA. We've got smaller numbers of people on site generally when we're doing briefings for bridge inspections, but again, enforcing 2 metre separation, no wet signing, recording briefings on video rather than with paperwork, and all briefings carried out outdoors. And also for our inspection teams, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but pairing up engineers. So throughout the past 10-week period, we've been pairing up engineers, so to minimise the risk of cross-contamination. In terms of other techniques we've used in advance of COVID-19, really, in terms of innovation, use of technology, we've been using reality capture techniques, so use of 360-degree cameras, the type that Google use for Street View. We've been using these a lot more, and one 360-degree view will be worth at least 20 2D pictures that we take on site. So this makes, in terms of the time on site, can be reduced. It's a lot more efficient. So in terms of the work on site, and also in terms of planning as well, when we bring these pictures back to the office from a site recce, the planning is a lot easier when we can use these 360-degree views. I've just attached a snippet of one here just to give you an indication of what the type of information we can pick up on site. So this is from a jack arch bridge here, and also it's got a series of jack arches, and it's also got a series of structural beams. And being able to have this data back in the office is really useful for us in avoiding repeat visits as well. We can miss things when we're on site, so having these 360-degree views really makes the It gives us a lot more assurance we're going to pick up the information that we need on site. And the feedback that we've got from site teams as well is that the inspections, we've managed to get through them quicker using this technology. We've done a lot of inspections in the past 10 weeks in Scotland, and when we do that, we've tended to, as I said, sort of pair up teams of 2, and they'll head up and do four structures at a time over a week. We've done a lot of inspections in Inverness, Fort William Way, but typically I've just included some details here really of dealing with unforeseen events. So for this week-long series of inspections in Scotland, we'd prepared a 9-seater van with an internal barrier, packed it with all the equipment. We had the team of 2 ready to go, drove up, and on the way up to Scotland, there's a problem with the clutch in the van at Perth, so a vehicle breakdown at Perth. It's far from ideal. The garage indicated it was going to take at least a week to repair the van, but really we just had to think on our feet. So we managed to get another van, but not an MPV type van, just a sort of cab van to carry the equipment. And we acquired a separate hire car so we could continue with the series of inspections. And the photograph on screen here is for Bannerby Swing Bridge. We inspected this structure with a shared line block with network rail, but in terms of maintaining social distancing, obviously just keeping in regular communication with network rail. So we do the higher mileage end of the structure while network rail do the low mileage, and keep in communication with them, and then swap and cross the bridge separately as necessary to complete the inspection. In terms of general feedback overall from the teams that have been on site, in terms of the modifications to the access methods, generally working well. Use of site marshals or COVID champions for larger groups, beneficial, essential really, because one of the key feedback I think we get is it's very easy to become complacent as well on site and just drift back into conflicting with the 2-meter social distancing movement. So where we've got large groups on site, definitely the use of site marshals essential. Another aspect that's more challenging really is mentoring junior engineers. Normally when we're on site, we're working closely with them, especially when they're taking site notes, just so we can check that their interpretation of the structure is correct. And that's taking more time really when we get back to the office and reviewing site notes remotely and conference calls. Also just like to touch on really remote working. We've got a large team working remotely, both on site and at home. And one of the other aspects is really just focusing on health and well-being of staff working from home for long periods of time. It has been a concern. So since lockdown, we've got a team of 80 in Newcastle. We break that down into line managers with no more than three or four reports, and each of those line managers have been contacting their reports twice a week, at least twice a week, if not daily, just to check on their health and well-being. So in addition to reviewing the workload going forward, just asking them how they are really. So and everyone's situation's different. So you might have people in a shared flat which are really struggling to find that space to work remotely, and just struggling with the lockdown measures, not having space really, and freedom at home. Equally, we've got others with families at home and the challenges of homeschooling. So it's important we keep talking to staff and we keep checking that their health and well-being are okay, and just supporting that as well. As a company, we're sending out daily positive news emails. There's a lot of people can get sucked into reading everything on the internet about COVID-19. So we just like to counter that really. There's lots of positive stories about remote working across the company and projects across the company that we like to provide to the staff. And in addition, there's a lot of help and support online with an employee assistance helpline. And my general experience over the past 10 weeks, and most people are coping with this pretty well and they've adopted this sort of new normal behaviour. But there are bound to be people who struggle with it a bit more, and it's about trying to give them keep in contact with them and give them the support that they need. What I also thought was useful was really just looking at the wider impact of COVID-19 on the works that we've done. I just looked at compared the works we've done in 2019 with 2020. And in general terms, since the establishment of lockdown, we've done 117 bridge inspections, 2,500 hours on site, and we've been on site from Kent up to northern Scotland. And you can see on the pin map there the distribution of sites that we've been working on. To get a direct comparison with 2019, I've just looked at weeks 1 to 7. In 2019, we did 67 inspections with 2,500 hours on site, and 2020 we've done 97, just slightly less hours on site. And what that's showing really is we've tried to focus more on some of the smaller scale structures that we have in the work banks for the year, which that are a lot easier to implement social distancing on site, and really that's worked well. So there's a 50% increase in the number of inspections that we've done this year, because we've been breaking the works down that can be completed by smaller teams. So just to summarise really the key points, I think the first 2 weeks of lockdown we found challenging in terms of keeping a pace with updated guidance from the government and implementing updating our safe systems of work. But really the progress in site inspections, we've maintained that, and it's similar to previous years. The one thing we are conscious of really is that there's been some impact on site works in terms of providing additional vehicles and sourcing different types of accommodation. But the one thing we will understand a bit more is in terms of the office-based work. I think they're likely to be potentially less efficient. We'll continue to work remotely, but certainly a couple more months into the project we'll have a better feel for that. But that's a bit harder to quantify really in terms of the impact on efficiency in delivering projects through remote working. But generally I think a lot of the findings from remote working, we'll have a lot of changes for the better as well coming out of this in terms of remote working. So that's the end of the presentation. So thanks very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Greg. Again, lots of interesting stuff to get your teeth into. Keep the questions coming in, please. We're to finish off our 3 lots of presentations. We're going to look at earthworks and drainage and specific issues around that. And Tony Morgani is going to deliver that presentation. Tony is engineering manager working for J. Murphy & Sons, covering the track interface across earthworks and drainage, working with HS2, civils asset management, utilities, power and property schemes. Tony joined the rail industry as a trackman 16 years ago and has held various roles in track maintenance and works delivery, and is now working with infrastructure projects. Completing a civil engineering degree apprenticeship program at the University of Derby, Tony is now a registered engineering technician with the Permanent Way Institution and with the Institution of Civil Engineers. So Tony, thank you for agreeing to present to us, and I'll hand the floor over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Let me try and get my presentation. There we go. Hopefully you can see that and hear me okay, yeah?
And certainly, yes, see you and hear you. That's fine, Tony. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. At this stage, being the last presentation, and after a couple of months of Boris, I'm sure I'm going to be leading you down a path well trod with these COVID-19 measures now, but bear with me and we'll look at it from the JMS point of view. So during the pandemic, as essential workers, we've continued to maintain and renew vital infrastructure. That'll be in our transport sectors, energy, water, All of these are going to be and continue to be essential to the functioning of the country at the time. A number of these schemes obviously remain really quite important to the operation of the railway. The earthworks particularly, where failure would represent the cessation of function on that line. Near enough, if an embankment were to collapse or a cutting was to fail, you'd be looking at block lines, which is obviously going to have an impact on movement of both key workers and supplies around the country at the moment, which is pretty much the last thing that anyone wants to happen. Slight advantage we've probably got on some of these schemes is that just by the very nature, the guys are often in machinery, obeying exclusion zones, all that kind of good stuff. So they'll already be socially distanced to a degree. If we were talking more about the drainage schemes, then you guys are working much closer together with the manual handling of bits of equipment, the engineers taking levels and things like that. But with the earthworks, I guess we're in a slightly more fortunate position. There's been all sorts of stuff going on we've heard about from the other guys in their presentations. This migration to working from home, working remotely, which has had plenty of its own challenges, but also I think, just to echo what the other guys said, some real positives. I feel like within Murphy's become more efficient. There's the odd meeting that will drag on a little bit, but if it's got a strong chairperson and a robust agenda, I think we can get through a lot more than perhaps we will do if we were sitting around an office with coffee breaks and lunch interfering and all that kind of thing that generally would happen. Also, from my point of view, in terms of these meetings, I've been able to fit a lot more in. My area of responsibility kind of geographically covers the majority of the country. So if there's a meeting in York and a meeting in Wigan or Birmingham or any of these other places, I'm going to have to make a decision or put everyone else to the trouble of rearranging. And that goes for everyone else within the meeting, obviously, as well. So I think with a little bit of clever schedule juggling, we've managed to fit in a lot more into the day in terms of those meetings, design reviews, briefings, whatever they may be. On the flip side of that, it is challenging. I've got 3 little kids here of my own who do their best to impinge on my efficiency, to demand my attention, to entertain the people if I'm on video calls. But I think there's an acceptance across not just the industry, but the country that's the situation for a lot of people, and we're all doing our best. It's not easy for anyone, least of all the kids are probably missing their friends and all of that. So as well as the working from home, there's been a reduction in non-essential, well, there's been a ban almost on non-essential site attendance to protect those guys that are out there delivering the essential works. Obviously, the working from home has been facilitated with the likes of Microsoft Teams and Skype. Protecting our workforce. So a lot of thought, a lot of time went into looking at the vehicle fleet, figuring out which ones were suitable for multiple occupancy and which simply weren't. If you look at the centre picture there with the little Hyundai estate car or whatever it is, the guys there are taping out at 2 meters, which kind of clearly demonstrates that that's a single occupancy vehicle there. The guy on the left is taking part in regular deep cleaning of the vehicle, exterior, anterior, just to stop any transmission of anything we wouldn't want to see. The larger picture on the right, very similar to what we've just seen in the AECOM presentation, where we've got a larger vehicle and a barrier has been erected to prevent the spread of anything unpleasant from the front to the back there, to allow multiple people to use these larger vehicles still, and kind of keep some control on the number of vehicles we've got entering sites. Obviously, we've got, a limited footprint for a site setup, so we can't have sort of unlimited number of vehicles in there, because that comes with its own sort of safety issues and whatnot. as I've mentioned, obviously, regular cleaning of those vehicles and shared spaces is hugely important, so as not to undermine the work we're all doing. Briefings, again, something we've seen on a couple of other slides, but some more pictures. Pictures are always good. So briefings are taking place outdoors, strictly maintaining the social distancing, the 2 meters plus between people. This is going to be challenging for the people delivering the briefing. We're all trained, we're all taught to sort of engage with the audience that we're briefing, to maintain eye contact, to ask lots of questions, to keep an eye on anyone whose attention might be wandering. All that's going to be very difficult when you're potentially standing 10, 15 meters away on the opposite side of a grand circle. So yeah, there's challenges with that, but I think on the whole we've adapted well. The feedback's been good. The message seems to be getting across, and people are respecting these social distancing measures. Some more pictures there, same sort of stuff. So we've got a big earthwork down at Blackthorn in Piddington. That's a picture of an area within the site compound there on the left. The guys receiving a daily briefing. So desk and all that sort of stuff's gone outside, so things can be put down and people aren't juggling paperwork around trying to deliver an effective brief. Quite a large team on the site there, so a bit of a challenge trying to fit everyone into their little space where they can get the briefing, but also be safe as well. In places where that's not been possible, there's obviously been things like staggered start times, multiple briefings, but where possible, if we can reduce that sort of thing, then we're going to be more efficient. In terms of the facilities, we've got a number of permanent offices up and down the country, as well as multiple site compounds with your sort of semi-permanent structures, your canteens, your offices, your signing in and out huts, toilets, storage, all that sort of stuff. So again, we've been quite fortunate in terms of the weather. It's not your normal British summertime, I'd say. So it's been easier to do the briefing and for people to take their breaks outside in the sunshine. A couple of lads there sitting on the chairs, taking a well-earned break. In terms of some of the utility type stuff, the water and the gas, the picture down on the bottom right is kind of showing some of the measures that have been taken to keep the general public away from the work sites. So it's like added buffer layer between the guys and people who won't have been briefed and who won't fall under our jurisdiction in terms of keeping that separation. There's been all sorts, obviously, all over the news and whatnot of people's various interpretations of the government guidance, and just trying to remove that element of risk from our workers. Fella at the top there got his gloved up, having a good clean of the offices there. This sort of thing's happening regularly. Again, I think it's good practice to be taken forward beyond this. I think we will be looking at social distancing and all these other measures for some time to come, but I think it's also forming habits within people that probably are going to remain beyond that, and good positive ones really as well. So personal hygiene, keeping things clean, looking at reducing unnecessary travel, which has got its own safety implications, as well as allowing people to be more efficient with their time. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, staggered break times, keeping both minimal numbers in the break rooms and on site at the same time by doing that. Additional signage, lots of signs all over the place asking people to keep their distance. Nice picture of a beautiful urinal down there where a couple of in the corner have been strung off to keep people from inadvertently coming within the 2 meter distance. Again, down the bottom, you can see these yellow lines, which have become quite commonplace in and around supermarkets and the like. These bays to keep people 2 meters apart. They've been introduced on the walking routes around our sites, as well as one-way systems. Again, almost commonplace now to stop people having to pass as they're walking along. During the works themselves, so looking at having the minimum staff on site while still having enough people to deliver the job safely, maintaining those social distancing rules, thinking about how we demarcate those on site, whether it be using a rail or a cess walkway or some vortex fencing, just to sort of illustrate to the guys when they're being briefed that this is kind of your physical demarcation of your 2 meters. All paperwork, be that work package plans, task briefings, are now inclusive of COVID-19 special measures. So giving the guys on site clear direction on how we expect this to be rolled out, not leaving anything open to interpretation. So you can see there's guys at the bottom of the shaft there, all working in good space. People walking along walking routes and things, and as in the centre there, it's kind of, for those of us who've been around the industry for a while, it's almost counterintuitive to be spaced out when you're working and when you're travelling, because we've kind of always been taught and trained to keep as a tight unit, to keep close, to maintain communication so that your COS or your safe work leader can sort of have a good idea of where everyone is and what they're doing at any given time. But so now we're kind of working against that and spreading ourselves out a bit, whilst also trying to be safe as well. Bottom right, there's a footbridge being landed there. It's a nice illustration of people keeping their distance. They've almost got a railway line each there. And up at the top, we've obviously got to think about our site engineers as well. In some ways, it's almost a solitary profession at times anyway, but also whether they've got supplementary staff with them, keeping them safe. Could be difficult wearing some of the PPE and operating the equipment, so we've had to give consideration to all that sort of stuff as well. Further measures. So all the guys have been issued with these reusable personal drinks containers, be that water bottles, coffee cups, which, COVID-19 aside, is just good for the environment. Before all of this, we were all talking about the environment and sustainability. These two things really have gone hand in hand. So that, as well as reducing our waste, we've also got guys with their own drinks container, their own drinks receptacle. So being able to wash that themselves, being confident of the provenance of that and maintaining hygiene. Additional PPE and disposal of this. So where stuff can't be reused, where it might be deemed disposal required, these would be costs that we weren't aware of previously, that we weren't forecasting for, that we're not going to get a recovery for. So there's been the challenge around building this into our business, as well as just simple things like providing the facility for people to safely store PPE awaiting disposal. As before, I think one of the other guys mentioned there was COVID champions. We've got COVID-19 marshals who do very similar. They're the kind of ever-present reminder of maintaining your distance, using the one-way systems properly, not encroaching on the kind of the 2 meter bays, all that sort of stuff. Again, providing the feedback from site on what's working, what's not working, any suggestions on that. Forehead strip thermometer is issued to individual site staff. They keep an eye on their temperature, sort of an early indicator of any coronavirus symptoms. I know we've also been on some sites looking at the thermal imaging cameras as well, so that there's a third party who's got sight of who might be getting a bit warm. Key worker letters were obviously issued out to all of these guys that are still out and about, particularly early days when the lockdown was first announced, and you had to be in receipt of these to be travelling around the country, maybe getting challenged by the authorities. It was very important that these were issued out early enough to all the guys out there to enable works to go on without any hitch. Slightly away from site again, the guys that are sitting at home or in reduced capacity offices or whatever. There's been a real push from the company, whether it's in the form of the screensavers. There's one up there with almost a sample of the photos we've used in this presentation, really, just so the guys that are not on site can sort of still see what's going on, still feel involved. Bottom right there, some of the teams have organised quiz nights and just general get-togethers just within their own time there, just to maintain the social contact with their friends and colleagues that they might be missing. As we mentioned, there's some people who are living entirely alone. Well, that might sound like quite a pleasant position to me, having spent weeks with the children. I'm sure on the flip side, it's very difficult as well. It's very difficult just being on your own there in the peace and quiet. So yeah, there's been all these kind of things going on. Within the working day, we have regular functional meetings, you know, be it engineering, procurement, operations. Those guys will get together on Microsoft Teams and, you know, use the video facility so you can sort of see another human face and just have a general catch up, review any challenges, how works are going and whatnot. Project teams doing exactly the same, just to iron out any specifics to their jobs. Challenges. I know there was a mention in one of the previous presentations there about mentoring. That's probably, for me, been one of the things that's had to be put on hold a little bit, the one-on-one training on sort of track competencies, that sort of thing out on site, where you'd be, you know, sharing a piece of equipment, a gauge or something, and a notebook and comparing notes. That's kind of had to just be put on hold for the time being. There's not really a great way of doing that. So yeah, thank you. That's the overview from Murphy's, those early stage sort of coronavirus measures that we put in place. They seem to have been going successfully so far. Feedback's been good. Managed to continue to deliver our essential works. Yeah, I hope that's been of some interest. Cheers, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Tony. Again, another fascinating presentation demonstrating how Murphy's have been coping. So thank you to all presenters. 3 fascinating, very comprehensive presentations looking at different fields of engineering in the rail environment and how they have coped with COVID. So now we're going to go into the Q&A session. As I said previously, please fire your questions through the chat function, the little white speech bubble in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and I will review those questions and fire them at the group of presenters and see what reaction they can give us. So just before we get into questions proper, I would observe that 1 or 2 of the more eagle-eyed attendees have raised the issue of photos of people standing on rails, which I think appear in one of the presentations, and I think that's just an indication that yeah, COVID is a risk, and there are lots of other risks, and it's, as well as I think was stated by Steve and Nick at the beginning of the first presentation, that we remember that there are lots of other risks on site apart from COVID, and don't allow our attention to be dominated simply by the COVID risks. So I think I'll say no more about standing on rails, but it was noted. Turning to something a bit more substantive, I was very interested that at least one of our contractors is, in fact more than one, is an international operation. I know Colas operates throughout Europe, and AECOM has offices worldwide, and I wondered if I could sort of address all the presenters and ask the extent to which there has been international sharing of your own company's experience or experience in the international fields which you're engaged in, and the extent to which sort of you've been contributing to that or received help or support from other countries operations with regard to dealing with COVID? Sort of what level of international sharing has there been? I wonder if one of you could have a go at that one.
Well, just speaking on behalf of AECOM, I mean, like most, most companies are getting larger and becoming larger global companies at the moment. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of interaction amongst the different geographies around the world. I mean, generally, the bulk of that happens with the sort of health and safety team initially sharing good practice across the globe. And I think we're really going to see the benefits of that and a lot of feedback from that really when we start thinking about moving back into offices as well. You know, that's happening already across the globe in some locations, and we're looking to get feedback from those in the Asia Pacific region about their what they have found in terms of what works for return to the office. So already, whilst I don't see that happening in the immediate future, we're already planning for that at the moment and taking cognizance of what they've found about what works and what doesn't work in terms of the numbers of staff that you might want to bring back into offices as well. So
okay, thank you. Thank you, Greg. Steve, I wondered if you've got anything to say from a COLAS perspective on that one.
Yeah, we've had lots of communications from our French HQ and also from Bouygues as well, parent company. And during the research and keeping abreast of everything that's happening else in the world, I've been keeping an eye on what the current scientific evidence is from other countries, especially where it started in China. And one of the things that we've learned very early on is each individual organization, country, has their own viewpoints and what the correct levels of controls are. So all the controls we've put in place from our German counterparts and our French counterparts, you look at what their best practice is, but we can't mirror the controls because the controls are based on their own individual government said that thou shall do. Each government's done their own slight deviations, so there are some sizable differences in how everyone's approached to COVID and what they think the controls are. Even with the social distancing, is different from country to country.
That's interesting. Interesting. One of our other questioners has asked a sort of almost a related question, and that's do we have any feedback on the number of workers who we suspect may have caught COVID-19 on our sites? So do we have any feel for how effective our control measures have been? Tony, I wondered if you could deal with this one first and then maybe move on to Steve and Nick.
Yeah. So the feedback, the message that I've received in our sort of internal weekly briefings is that we've only had, I think we've had 3 cases of COVID-19 in the entire company. None of those have proved to be fatal. They've all recovered, fortunately. The quarantine period that we kind of put into place after the reporting of symptoms has proven to be effective, and there's been no transmission from site to site or across sites. So fingers crossed and touch wood, it appears that the measures are effective.
Yeah, good.
Likewise for AECOM, Stephen. So just a quick for the
yes,
I'll look after a team about 120 in the north, and we've had one that's been confirmed test, and one other suspected untested. So thankfully not too many in our patch at the.
And no indication that they were that the infections were actually transmitted whilst at work.
Yeah, none whatsoever, and certainly one person wasn't involved in site work, and the other person, this was before they got into the latest cycle of site inspection work as well. So they all happened after we'd gone to working from home and remote working. So yeah, so there's there's been no impact or cross-contamination through the through the team really.
So your control measures appear to be working well. What about in Southern Rail Systems Alliance, Stephen, Nick? Any data?
Yeah, from our data, we keep an eye on this. We've had no confirmed cases anyway, and nothing more than the odd person who's had a bit of a sneeze. And we've done the usual, let them work from home for the usual 7 days, and nothing's came of it. And speaking to the rest of the Rail Alliance, and because we've got Network Rail within our, speaking to the routes and regions and the entire infrastructure, we've only got one possible suspected case in the entire infrastructure capital project that we're aware of. So the controls are working very effectively.
Thank you. I just wonder, another question from one of our attendees. The railways have a sort of a long and dishonourable history of not using this sort of electronic meeting and electronic sharing technology that we're plugged into right now. And COVID has really catapulted us into a new world. To what extent do you think that this is actually going to affect our long-term culture and behaviours? Because it's certainly, in my perspective, and I think in our questioners, it's those sort of culture and behaviours that have kept us back in the face-to-face world and reluctant to adopt this sort of 21st century communication technology. And I wondered if you feel that there's a danger that we will slip back, we'll move back into face-to-face mode, because it's always nicer to see the whites of people's eyes, or whether you think that the change of behaviours, the change of cultures can be made permanent.
I can jump in on this one. We've actually done a lessons learned exercise to see what the positives are from this regards to the group. So we did the environment, we did the personnel, we did all the various things, but we've actually took the viewpoint that the world that we knew of before COVID is probably never going to come back to us for the foreseeable future. There's always going to be some controls to some degree. There's going to be an exponential slope going down, but these controls are to stay for the foreseeable future. So we're learning to live with it, and as Nick said earlier in the presentation, we're learning to actually grow from it and see where the actual benefits are coming from it. On site, we've seen very high benefits with regards to the low-hanging fruit type incidents that you get from people working in close proximity with one another and not paying attention to their environment as much as they normally do. It really has heightened the level of safety of personnel generally on site. So the housekeeping, the slip, trips and falls and all of the low-level incidents have actually fallen off the edge of a cliff for us. So we have seen some benefits, but for the technology, I think it's here to stay, and slowly but surely the workforce and the alliances and all of Network Rail, we're engaging with it, and we're going to be keeping it going forward even after COVID is long gone.
As well, it's Nick Matthews here. If I could add to that as well, there's a behavioural things behind all this use of telecommunications and stuff and video conferencing, and they say it takes about 3 months to make something a habit and get used to something. And all our efforts to try video conferencing and such things in the past has failed because there has been no big stick, literally, to drive everyone to do it. But I'm not necessarily saying we should have global pandemics to make behavioural change, but we are going to be literally in lockdown for at least 3 months. And the transition, the stick we needed to move to people using video conferencing is there for everybody to see. And I mean, I'll speak personally for my lines director, who likes nothing more than get us all to travel around the whole country to get together once a month. Even he is now seeing the benefits and productivity gains in using video conferencing. So I think some of the behavioural issues have been forced upon us, but I really am convinced we can keep that going forward. And as I said in my bit of my presentation, we looked at just Colas Rail's, just on the South Rail System Alliance cost savings for November when we first started the full alliance with Plainline and S&C, compared to the extreme of April, i.e. full lockdown. And that was just £52,000 in travel costs. Even if we can just half that figure, and that's just one third of the alliance. That's a massive saving we can make each year, and that's all public funds. So yes, I'm hopeful that the behaviours are going to be corrected, and I think that people will see the benefits going forward.
Does anybody else have anything to add to that one? If not, I'll move on. Nick, you mentioned it's quite an interesting sort of lead on to another question. You mentioned that your alliance director loves to do nothing more than travel around, visiting different parts of the alliance and seeing things going on. One of our attendees has asked, how we go about, or how you go about, sort of balancing what one might call non-essential visits by senior, or the risks associated with non-essential visits by to site and to operations by senior managers, versus the assurance, the high-level assurance that those sort of visits provide that matters are under control. And certainly from my latter years in the industry, I always valued getting out and about, as obviously do others, to just to sort of, I suppose, kick the tires and get a feel that what it says in the reports is really true. And I wondered if you guys had developed or had some comments on that. So again, maybe if Nick and Steve could lead off on that, and then Tony and Greg contribute.
Okay, yeah. So sorry, Steve. It's Nick again here. So first of all, I hope my alliance director is not on the conference call, or I'll be in a lot of trouble. However, actually, site visits from the sort of leadership teams is absolutely essential, and I'm not saying that we should ever stop that. We need to go out on site. We need to feel what's going on there, and it's actually an essential part of our duties. And I wouldn't do that. My wider point was a lot of the meetings where we don't need to be together, such as design review meetings where the teams in Bristol and Swindon get together virtually and get the same subject matter across. There's a sort of saving. So for me, the surveillance checks, the getting out on site, we can't ever get rid of that. But I think we do need to get away a little bit from the people who just turn up to claim they've done a day's work, and really they're just having a bit of a jolly out on site. But I think, especially the alliance directors, people like Steve, the head of safety, Joan, who's our head of engineering, those people being on site, being visible, it's absolutely critical, so they can talk firsthand to the troops on the ground, get first back feedback what it's really like. So I don't think personally I'm for 1 second saying they should be diminished at all.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Greg or Tony, would you like to?
Yeah, just to echo that, I'm trying to arrange a site safety tour for our UK&I MD at the moment to one of the sites, and they're essential really, for another pair of eyes to see how we do things on site, and B, just for that engagement as well, just to show staff that really we're bought into safety from the throughout the structure really. So I think it's critical that we have to keep doing that. I'd echo Nick and Stephen's comments on that on the SRSA, the people have to be visible, have to be doing that really. So yeah, we fully support it.
Okay, I presume that goes for you as well, Tony, is that?
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much in the same vein as all the other guys have just said, in terms of your senior leadership teams and your safety and quality reps. Those guys are always going to fall under the essential banner. It's important, and it's always been valued. The feedback from the front line into those areas of the business. But as I think Nick was just saying, it's the guys who may fancy a change of scenery and might want to just sit at a desk on site and go through some reports or whatever it be for a day. We need to get away from that and sort of follow the government advice, whereas if it can be done from home, it is done from home, just to protect our guys out there and the people who might be feeling a bit unloved at home as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
if I can jump in from myself, we approached it from an alliance viewpoint as trying to get really clever about how we actually do this information gathering whilst not having unnecessary visits to site. And with regards to the safety team, my entire safety team are COVID champions, which means they're not on site just to do a safety inspection. They're able to do that role whilst also undertaking a role we've already got on site. So we just looked at really ingenious ways to do it. And where we got leadership tours, in the past you might have the royal tours of 4 or 5 turning up. We limited to a single lead person from leadership going in to do a tour or an inspection or a visit, and that ensured that we maintained the actual ability to have that leadership visibility, but reduced the amount that we're actually doing. So we're actually trying to balance it out. So it was a balance of risk control process.
Right. Yeah, that's yeah. That sounds like good practice that could be spread across across the network. Moving sort of a little bit more onto the practical front. One of our attendees has asked about your company's views on the need for face coverings, simple masks for general use. I think they were mentioned 2 or 3 times in the presentations, but I didn't see many pictures. But it's as sort of mask wearing is becoming more prevalent, more common within the general population, particularly when using public transport. It's not mandated in this country, but I know it is in several European countries now. I wonder if you've any views on or any thoughts on where mask wearing is going, where facial mask wearing is going in the new world. Tony, Nick?
Yeah. I think currently we're in a position where it's task specific, very much where if you're within those 2 meters of another person, then you're going to be required to wear additional PPE. Away from that, I think at the moment it's still personal choice, whereas being quite highly recommended by the government and the people that are out and about in public spaces and on the public transport where it can't be avoided. I think that's going to be recommended, but at the moment it's still personal choice away from those task specific items.
I mean, Southern Rail Systems Alliance, you do a lot of work in the London area. Have you sort of seen that? Have you seen the pressures coming for general adoption of wearing of face masks?
Yeah, we have a very simple flow process. On my presentation slide, you remember on one of the slides, there's a little blue process with about 6 boxes on it. That's my mask wearing process. So, as mentioned previously by some of the colleagues on the call, if you're outside 2 meters, then the mask process doesn't apply. It's the mask specific to the task. So whatever you would wear normally before COVID existed is what you wear now. Inside 2 meters, it's a very simple question. Would you have normally worn a mask if COVID didn't exist? If the answer is yes, we default to the highest level of mask we have, which is an AFED. If the answer is no, and you're only wearing masks specifically for COVID, then we're using type 2R face masks. And that's because we're using a single PPE solution that people are generally wearing on the outside world when traveling in transport or anywhere else. So we keep it really simple for them to understand and enforce. And that was after looking at a lot of the research from not only the Chief Medical Advisor from the UK, they produced a white paper for the government on the use of masks and how much it actually protects against COVID, but also from other governments as well.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Another interesting one about sort of relationship between companies and employees, and one of our attendees has asked, how easy was it to convince operatives to come back to work and be safe and use social distancing rules? Have you found that employees are generally happy to do this, or have you had sort of people who've really felt very unsure and very cautious, concerned about coming back to work? again,
On the bridge inspection side, the majority have been keen to do it, and certainly some people, as we've alluded to, with a number of children at home, have been very keen to get out and continue with inspections. That's not everyone. There's been the odd person who's challenged it a bit more, about whether this is essential work. So we just had to work with those people on an individual basis, really, just to in terms of the justification of the work and also the mitigation measures that we've put in place. Yeah, but certainly the majority have been keen to do this.
Any views from South Rail Systems Alliance or
yeah,
from?
it's the same sort of process. Most people are actually keen to go back to work. It was a means, especially early on, of actually getting further than a couple of metres outside your front doorstep and turning around again. So a lot of the workforce were actually happy, and you could actually, even though they're 2 metres apart, have some sort of social interaction with their work colleagues. We have had the odd individual across the supply chain who came to us and said, I have this person at home, I fall outside the criteria of not being able to work, but I'm not really happy about coming to work. And to be honest, we've respected that. As an alliance, we put people first, so we've respected that, and we've found other means and other things for that person to do.
Yeah. What about you, Tony? Have you had any issues?
No, I think in general, again, I'd echo what the other guys have said there. Those who can and are able to are very keen to be out there working, like I say, just to get that little bit of normality back, the ability to move away from the home setting, to talk to people, to interact, albeit from a distance. We've got plenty of those people who are either shielding or being shielded, that can't do that, that are continuing where possible to work from home, whilst at the same time being very eager to get the opportunity to go back out once things do get back to normal. But I think the general feeling is the more we can do to get back to normality in a safe way, the better, definitely.
Okay. Well, we're pretty much out of time, but maybe there's one final question which I thought was always, and it's not addressed to you with your specialist hats on, but one of our attendees has said that there's been a lot said recently about the reduction of business travel and commuting travel, in fact rail travel in general. Passenger numbers are way down, and they said, if everyone is doing this, how does the panel feel about the future of the rail industry? I mean, I think it's an interesting question, which is, I think it's been echoed by a number of others, and I just wondered on as much a personal basis as anything else, how you feel how you feel about that question. Where do you think the rail industry is going in terms of numbers of people? Do you think the rail industry will actually bounce back in terms of passenger transport? Again, maybe if Nick, if you could start this one.
Yes, Steve. I have to be honest, I haven't given a massive amount of thought, but one of the things, what the area I grew up in, HS2 goes straight for the middle of HS2, and there's a lot of people in that area where I grew up are, for obvious reasons, quite anti-HS2. But one of the debates I've noticed around that is yes, we probably do need more capacity, but is it more of a local rail service serving communities we need rather than city to city mass transport for business? And I think with us trying to be more sustainable and more green going forward, yes, I honestly think we know that the railways is a very sustainable form of transportation. And as people sort of said, people are social creatures. Now, they do want to get out and about and meet people. But I suppose the question really, more than an answer, is the railways just purely there as the plaything for the rich people to do business? Or actually, should it be more a social enabling function to connect people locally?
Okay, that's an interesting dimension on it, Nick. But what about Greg? Do you have any views on where the industry is going to end up after this, and you know, long-term views on where we're going in terms of passenger numbers and business cases and all that flow from that?
Yeah, just similar to what Nick was saying. I live in Newcastle, and Newcastle has the metro, and you know that's a fantastic makes a fantastic contribution to just the society in Newcastle and Gateshead and the surrounding area. So there may well be more emphasis on light rail, and in time I'm sure we will get through this, whether there's in terms of control measures from testing, from antibody testing, whether they do eventually find a vaccine. We will get through this, and there's climate change isn't going to go away, and in terms of rail transport, that's still going to be one of the main tools really in terms of minimizing carbon emissions. So I don't think it's going to go away. It will bounce back, but it might rebalance slightly, and I think certainly there might be more of an emphasis on light rail and local solutions, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any final contributions to that one from the panel? And in which case, me having allowed it to overrun by about the session to overrun by about 5 minutes, can I thank you all very much for your presentations. Thank those who've tuned in online, and particularly for asking a lot of intelligent questions. Can I remind you that the next SPOLK is on the 2nd of July. Sorry, 2nd of June. What am I saying? 2nd of June. So next week, next Tuesday. So I hope you'll have the opportunity to tune in then to hear a bit more about how our rail industry organisations are coping with COVID-19 and the challenges that it raises. I'm sorry if you feel your questions haven't been answered. We'll have a look down the questions after the session and see whether there's anything we can do about getting some answers out. But I think most of the areas that have been raised have actually been covered by somewhere in the responses. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a good afternoon and rest of the week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.